I saw him there, clearly, lying in the bed, not much more than a couple of lumps under the blanket. I took 3 steps back, down the stairs and closed the door, standing on the half landing, wondering what was I going to do. You see, I was 14 years old at this stage, and this was my neighbour. This was a man that I had known ever. And that was his bed, the one he had spent the last year in, suffering from cancer. And it was kind of our relationship. His job was to torture me, or so I thought. He would, because they lived in a pub, make me sort bottles until I could tell every bottle's shape by touch. I could tell every crate by touch. He would take me bowling if he could find me. And I swear that man used me as target practice. It was my job to find the bowl. And if he got me in the right place at the right time, he would make me accompany him to the shed. Now, this is not that kind of story, because what he did in the shed was cook liver and onions in an old cooker that had been thrown out because his wife wouldn't let him cook it inside. And all I can remember is the smell of must and mold, the spiders, cobwebs, and the bits of tin falling into the roof into that liver and onions. But the other thing about that day, that I saw him clearly in the bed, he had died 2 weeks beforehand. And I was staying in the house to keep his widow company. And I had to go through that room to get to where I was sleeping. And why was I picked to keep her company? Oh, well, that goes to family legends. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and fellow guests, there are certain stories in every family's life that become legends. And me going to this house was one of those legends, because my mother tells the story, from the time that I could walk, I would make it to the pub on my own at 1.5 years. The dog used to keep me company on the road because it was only a couple of 100 meters, but I had to cross the road or cross the field. They put up ditches, they put up gates, they even put up electrified fence. But I still made it to the pub. And my faithful dog would lie outside the door until I came home. But the second legend, the one that we can tell, when my mother's telling it, we know it word for word. We can tell every inflection because it's been told so often. And this story was the night that I, at the tender age of 2.5, woke up one night, and because my dad was gone to a meeting somewhere, the back light, the kitchen light was on, the backyard light was on, and the door was on the latch. And I decided I was going next door. So brave bucko that I was, I prepared. I got my wellies, I got my bottle, and I got my tricycle, and I headed off across the field. The dog was in the outhouse that night. It was the last night he was in the outhouse, because I got halfway across the field, out of the light, and kicked up a bit of a rumpus. And my mother's version of the story is, the neighbour is on, a couple of minutes later, banging on the window, "Where's Anne? Where's Anne? Where's Anne?" My mother woke up, totally disorientated, going, "She's in bed." "She's not, she's here," because he was the kind of man that would ask a question when he knew the answer, and it wasn't the one you were going to give. The thing was that his wife recently started telling me the same story. And up to a point it was the same. There was still me up in the middle of the night. There was still me putting on my wellies, taking the bottle. But there was the part where her story changed. He was outside the pub trying to get a few of the regulars into the cars to take him home. And he paced. He heard me screaming. He paced up and down the yard, up and down the yard, up and down the yard. And I'm there wondering, what in the hell was bugging him? What took him so long? And then I remembered, this was the 1970s. This was a time when you might have known every boil and blister on your neighbour's backside, but you did not get involved. What happened inside the home stayed inside the home. And he broke that night. He headed off up across the field to find this little monster who wanted to go back with him, and he had to take home. And then she told me that when he came back, he was distraught. Angry. What's wrong with him? Pfft, he took me home, so what? My mother was the one that was wondering, was this going to be a portent of the future, having her daughter dragged home kicking and screaming from the pub in the middle of the night? No. He said to his wife, I don't think she'd have made it. She was frozen, she was drowned wet, and she was just sitting there. And I wondered what this was about. And he said, and it was Anne. And I'm kind of going, I don't understand this part of the story. This man tortured me for years. And she said, sure, there was no one else but you for him. You were the only child that mattered. Come or go, he didn't care about the rest of them. If it had been any other child crying, he wouldn't have gone. It was always about you. And I had to change my mind. I had to change over 40 years worth of thinking. This man is my torturer. He wasn't. He was my lifesaver. So after 40 years, I see him clearly now. Thank you.
I see him clearly now. Madam General Evaluator, fellow Toastmasters and welcome guests. That speech was so full of storytelling techniques. I hardly even know where to begin or what to focus on. I'm going to stick with some of the things that I found really, really impressive. One of which was the imagery. When you're telling an emotional story, particularly in the context in which we're in and you don't have all the body language and the space to work with, you really need to focus on the imagery and focus on the senses. And that speech was rich with allusions to our senses, the visual sense, the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, and all of that really works to create emotion when you can pull your listener into your story by appealing to their senses. So I thought that was really well done. Another thing that I found really good was the light and shade in that speech. It was a really strong speech and a very emotional speech, and it started off with what felt like something really sad and shocking. So it needed that little wave of light and shade going through the whole speech, the light and dark, and the humor was peppered throughout the speech quite well in order to create that sense of balance in the speech and to keep us from falling down into a black hole of emotion. Couple of things that maybe could work better if you're to tell the speech again, particularly again in the Zoom environment. One of the things that really struck me was the pen. And I'm demonstrating very clearly what happened like this, because when you bring something close to the camera like that, it completely distracts from your face and breaks that connection. So I'd say bring your awareness to that the next time you're giving a speech, particularly in Zoom. And also, I found it difficult. I don't know whether it was my tech or tech in general, but the words didn't match the face. So I can't use the facial expressions or gestures to help evaluate. But another thing, a teeny tiny thing that I could maybe recommend to give your speech more impact and more strength is to swap the last two sentences at the end and finish with, I see him clearly now. This man wasn't my torturer. He was my lifesaver. And just that simple switch of those sentences brings a huge oomph and power to the end of the speech. But what did I really love? The absolute beautiful use of language. Fantastic use of triads. What do we have? They put up ditches, gates, and an electric fence. I got my wellies, my bottle, and my tricycle. And he paced the yard up and down, up and down, up and down. Absolutely beautiful use of triads. And the use of language, such descriptive language, really supported the objectives of the speech in terms of bringing the light and shade, the impact, and the emotional power of the speech. So in conclusion, watch the use of the props close to the camera. Think about tweaking the ending just to bring that little bit more power to it, but beautiful imagery, very astute use of humor, and really fantastic language to support the speech objectives. Well done, I thoroughly enjoyed it.